Okay, so this is part 2 of my chapter 5 discussion on trade embargoes. So what basically happened was that the British, all right, the English, passed a whole, what would happen is they passed a law, and then Samuel would react. He was basically, from the British perspective, he was sort of like the chief agitator, you know. I mean, we would call him sort of the shit disturber, basically, because he was the one sort of inciting everything. So it went through a couple different rounds. There was first, there was what was called the Sugar Act, then there was the Stamp Act, and then Townshend Act. So what would happen is the British would bring in some sort of act. Okay, Samuel and his team, his co-conspirators, they call sort of this group, they called themselves the Sons of Liberty, would react. And the main reaction was this embargo, this sort of boycott to basically, they would all get together, and all the merchants in Boston, and then eventually pretty much all the colonies, it sort of spread and spread and spread. But it started in Boston. That's where it all went down. And we're not importing anything from Britain. Canceled all their orders. Said don't ship anything over. And then what would have happened was the British would repeal the act that they were fighting about, but then bring in some other act. Okay. And so what ended up happening was when they repealed the last one was the Townshend Act, but they said with one exception, we're going to keep the tax on tea. And so what they were really fighting about was who had authority to tax the colonies. Did the British Parliament have it, or did the colonies have it? And of course, you know, the one thing, that tea that they kept, of course, led eventually to the Boston Tea Party, and then eventually the war turned hot in Lexington, which is just to the west of Boston. Okay. So yeah, that basically summarizes it. There's a couple other things I wanted to point out as sort of interesting historical parallel. Is one of the things that Adams did was he was sort of like the if you like, the Facebook inventor of the 18th century, right? As you know, I mean, unless you're living, you know, on Mars or something, Facebook is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's a social network, right? Well, this is sort of what he did, right? You can use Facebook as a form of viral marketing, right? It's sort of I starting, you know, Neil's message, sent it to my friends, who can then send it to their friends, and it sort of spreads like wildfire, right? Well, that's sort of what he did. Now, of course, they didn't have Facebook back in the 1770s, so they had to have people riding horses and so on. But that's what he set up. They called it, what did they call it? The Committees of Correspondence, right? Which is basically their network to communicate and coordinate their revolutionary activities across all the 13 colonies. So that was one of his brainchild as well. So it kind of points to the importance of communication and establishing networks to among them. And that was also his thing that he did as well. Finally, just to wrap up, to bring in the economics of all this, so you have to remember, at the same time this is all going on, there was another guy named Adam Smith who was also alive. So this is a very exciting period of world history. I mean, we have American Revolution, then later on we ended up with the French Revolution. So we have revolutions in politics. We also have revolutions here in economics. I mean, because this whole embargo idea is coming. He's sort of inventing this in Boston there. And also, of course, we have the idea of a lot of the constitutional ideas that the Americans wrote into their Constitution were revolutionary as well. So we have that. The purpose of government, the rights of people to overthrow governments if they don't fulfill their responsibility. I mean, it was revolution of politics, we have economics, we have just everything is sort of changing. And of course, we have Adam Smith is sort of coming on board, criticizing mercantilism and replacing with this comparative advantage concept as well. So this was an exciting period to be alive, to say the least. And it would be kind of a cool thing if you could sort of go back in time, see what was going on. So the main point here of the sort of politics, and Adam Smith really captured this, was what Adams was trying to do was influence the British Parliament to get them to repeal these acts, right? So they would bring in, let's say, the Stamp Act, which is basically a tax on, if you want to have an official document, you had to get a stamp on it and pay for it, right? And so this also pissed them off because a lot of the government papers had to get stamps as well. So you couldn't have their colonial government without getting sort of the stamp seal of approval of Britain. So it was sort of undermining their independence, right? These are radical. This is the father of liberty, really. So that's why he thought that way. What Smith was basically saying, look, what basically happened by having all the merchants in Boston and then all the other cities eventually signed up. Pretty much, it spread, was that it undermined the British economy, and because of that, it created economic problems for the British industrialists, the merchant class, and so that meant that these merchants, the business guys, would go complain to their Parliament, right? Say, you got to repeal this act because if you don't, we're going to lose our businesses. He put it really well. This was Adam Smith writing at the time. It was his famous seminal work, The Wealth of Nations, pertaining to this instant in history, right? So this actual Samuel Adams guy and this importation. Non-importation agreement that he was doing. Adam Smith is writing about Samuel Adams and what's going on in the American colonies when he writes, if the total exclusion from the colony market was to last only for a few years, the greater part of our merchants used to fancy that they foresaw an entire stop to their trade. So it was shut down everything, all their trade. The greater part of our master manufacturers, the entire ruin of their business. So all the big shot manufacturers would be run out of business. And the greater part of our workmen and end of their employment. So it would cause all the people to lose their jobs. So in other words, what he's saying is that this became effective because Samuel, wanting to get his sort of political agenda achieved, by having this embargo, this boycott, if you like, although it's technically an anachronism to use that term, but nevertheless, this boycott, embargoes, non-importation agreement, caused all these economic problems for all the British, their workers, their capitalists, all the big business guys, who then put pressure on the British Parliament to have the acts repealed, and that's exactly what ended up happening. And so, so that's why I'm saying the idea of embargo did not, as your textbook suggests, come from this idea that it's, countries and national governments worry about bacteria and so on. It came from a way of achieving a political goals. It's using economic losses as a way of punishing adversaries. And then, of course, as I said, led eventually to the Boston Tea Party, which then led to the shooting war, the hot war, so to speak. Okay, so that's my point on that famous Boston brewer, Samuel Adams.